many of you brought your purchase orders tonight? Good evening to all, and I'm just absolutely thrilled to see so many people here. It's almost a record-breaking crowd. It's gratifying to see that you have that interest in an old plant that existed for almost 100 years. Additionally, we'll be talking about the successor who bought Wadsworth Brick, or General Clay. Can you hear Juanita?
Yeah, we need to find somebody to turn up the sound too. Keep going, Will.
Okay. General Clay purchased Wadsworth Brick and Tile in 1950 after a great deal of deliberation. And I saw Don Leatherman here tonight, and he tells me his father started all of that in 1904. How many of you remember what happened in 1904? How many of you happen to remember what happened in 1948? I tippy-toed into town.
That's all right. Just keep going. You're doing much better.
I'm fortunate tonight to have my daughter, Carol Grandy, here, and John Grandy, her husband, and my wife, Joan, right here, present to hear all this. I'll be telling you a good deal about Harold B. Epler, who bought the Wadsworth Brick and Tile Company in 1950. He had many interests. At one time, he owned or controlled 7 brick plants, almost 300 million brick a year. So that's a lot of brick. On February 5th, 1904, 113 years ago, an astute group met, and after hearing from the State of Ohio Department of Geology that there was a great valuable deposit of clay shale in southwest Wadsworth. That brought on a great deal of investors who couldn't wait to get their money down for a share in the company. And the company enjoyed many good years with hefty profits and good dividends. And they were able to secure good brick orders, large orders, from Goodyear, Ford, Goodrich, Firestone, and Kent State University and Bowling Green State University over those years. In 1948, I got a call from one of the directors, Alden Fletcher Sr., would I be interested in coming to Wadsworth to help manage the Wadsworth Brick and Tile Company. I showed up on February 5th, 1948, and stayed 40 years. The directors at that time then were Paul White, senior attorney, a very prominent attorney. I can't say enough good about him because he was so thorough and went on to become a federal judge appointed by Dwight D. Eisenhower at the Cincinnati office. He was truly a remarkable man, a great addition to our firm as he was secretary of the board. Ronnie Abel was president and longtime major stockholder. He lived on the west side of Wadsworth and would come to meetings. He was crippled. He had to use a wheelchair. Henry Kreider, a farmer, was a quiet sort, but he loved to see the gains we made. Frank Hillard, funeral director, was kind of the balance wheel for all of this. Joe Bender, an investor in real estate, was the other one, and Alden Fletcher from Painesville. Meanwhile, the management had aged and turned over with less interest in providing continuing staff with vital concerns. Consequently, the plan began to decline in many ways for lack of direction. This remained the theme of operating until 1948 when Director Alden Fletcher Sr. vowed to remedy and give the company a new chance. Fletcher called me at Ohio State University asking if I would accept a 90-day internship at Wadsworth Brick and Tile and on a trial proposal. I agreed to the proposal as reported February 5, 1948, unaware of the potential. I dug into this huge opportunity of my very best to register with the directors and later with General Clay Player. During most of the good years, Wadsworth Brickyard was recognized for its excellent product and well-tuned management. Somewhere in those middle years, the Ohio Match Company had planned a huge expansion and needed to order a large quantity of face brick from Wadsworth Brickyard. They were short on cash, so they made an offer to give Wadsworth Brickyard a big chunk of their stock. After following lengthy negotiations and meditation about this, the brick company board turned the match company down. How could that happen? How could a little brick company disavow the interest that the match company had? Word got around town that a little brick company had confronted such a major issue. In mid-30s, the company declined. Management went downhill. 2/3 were generation, or second or third generation, not very avid. Didn't modernize, it had no robotics. And in the least area of sales, they decided to turn their activity in that direction over to the Thomas Brick Company of Akron, Cleveland, and Detroit, whose only interest was self-serving themselves. So the plant pretty much operated at the direction of the Thomas Brick and Town Company. They didn't promote or advertise. They were content to accept conditions as they were. They had $29,000 in the bank and $29,000 in accounts receivable, with an uncertain future in 1950. General Clay Product Corporation, Harold B. Upper Sr., offered to buy the stock for $150,000 for all shares. April 1950, rumors got around town that the plant was for sale and about to change hands. General Clay had a plant at Baltic, Ohio, which was in a very prominent area for good products, and they brought that expertise to Wadsworth and transferred some of the types of brick. When the sale was evident, a local attorney offered to help his professional assistants and volunteered more when all the shares didn't come in. Loretta Franks, a Wadsworth resident, a girl, apparently an orphan at times, maybe you remember her, Don. She had 50 shares of stock, and we mailed her a statement, but it didn't come back. So we knew she was around somewhere. And Roy asked the attorney, offered assistance so he could bring that in. And he promised great redemption. He scheduled meetings with her in Pittsburgh, in Sewickley, Pennsylvania, and for 2 years gave us bills for expense that he expended to try to bring in that stock. We got a little tired of that because it was a no-show and non-production. So the owner of our company authorized that I go to Pittsburgh and see if I could bring it in. I spent much time in Pittsburgh trying to track down Loretta Franks. I did learn before I left Wadsworth on that trip that her last name was likely Dick, D-I-C-K. However, in the meantime, the attorney had been reporting that he'd been meeting her in Donora, Pennsylvania. So that's the first place I went, was Donora, to find out if she existed. And I learned that no one in Donora ever owned one share of stock of any company. So this taught me a lesson about trying to rely on attorneys at that point. I learned that her last name was Dick, and the phone book had 12 listings for the Dick family. After the third attempt, I reached Mr. Dick, who confirmed that his wife was Loretta Franks Dick. I invited me to his home in South Pittsburgh. He was in a very lavish home, a very wealthy man. It turns out that he owned a Dick Corporation which built the Pittsburgh airport. After a friendly visit with Mr. Dick and 2 hours of brandy, he told me that earlier that day he had heard from an attorney in Wadsworth telling me that that I likely would contact him about the stock and not to pay any attention to it. I wasn't a good fellow representative. So I had that to battle from the start. And Mr. Dick claimed he was confused and refused to do anything about either party. After 2 more years of regular contact with him, he was convinced that as vice president of the company, I was okay. Mr. Dick was for real too. His family owned the banks, trolley lines, construction companies, and various other investments. He built the Pittsburgh airport. Amazingly wealthy. After all this delay of a couple of years, Mr. Dick indicated that his wife was ready to sell her shares and turn them in for redemption. The only problem was she couldn't find the certificate. So Mr. Epper, president and owner of our company, readily assured them that he would issue a new certificate. And here's it in. The transaction is complete, but the end of the story is that the attorney, who by this time had found some other sources of income, had embezzled a good deal of money from a particular client, and he went to High State Penitentiary for 2 years. After release, and he lost his license, he fled to California as an auditor. Our plant at Baltic had the good fortune of having a fellow named Oscar Reidenbach as superintendent. He was very thorough in his ability to innovate and developed a so-called bark texture brick, which he was able to patent. And we got a patent on that for 19 years and brought that same texture to Wadsworth. Today, there is no evidence that a brick plant once prospered at this site. The many cave clay pits and ponds carry big-time testimony that many thousands of tons of shale and clay was extracted from the hillsides and cliffs and then turned into brick. Some of the pits were up 50 foot high, provided superior clay and material which we almost 100 years. Kent State University sent us geology classes to explore our diggings. Their ceramics department interacted with our operation and firing for experience. We submitted regular core diggings to evaluate to the American Society of Testing Materials, who would test for our brick and for quality to withstand weather and winter weather. Governor Rhodes, or Jim Rhodes.
Would you like some water?
Yeah.
Daughter asked if I could get you some water.
Sure.
Send it over here.
Okay. Governor Jim Rhodes happened to be a good friend of the president, owner of our company, and whenever they get together, they call each other the River Rat. They hail from near the Ohio River in southern Ohio. Governor Rhodes was an early advocate for Epper's support for the then new auto plant for Honda in Marysville, Ohio. Epper built new office buildings on Goodnight Boulevard in Columbus. Office staff was Hazel Cook and Maxine Thompson Pates. Sales were John Rossiter, Muggs Everly, Jack Everly, and Bill Clusty. In total, for all plants we had 13 salespeople. I have the good fortune of being in position to encourage 300 of the best dealers in the country. And they were great advocates of our product because we had a good product. And we sold brick from Bangor, Maine to Omaha. In our efforts to be prominent with various features of the project itself, the Brick Institute of America had an office in Canton. And their proposition was to unfold all the attributes of the brick product, related to architects, do job complaint problems, assist in any way they could to make sure that our brick or the brick industry was out front. The BIA also had a Washington office, which parlayed its political level to great advantage. The American Society of Testing Material handled also quality tests. In other words, we give them, give a firm representing SDM a chance to evaluate how good or how well our product performed. And they gave it a so-called winter test. Transportation, state body trucks, 3,000 or 4,000 brick per truck. Dump body trucks, 4,000 to 5,000 brick. Medium-sized trailer units, 7,500 brick. Full-size trailer, 12,500. Along that line, I have to remind you that one time I was home at dinner and I got a call from the plant saying there'd been a tragedy of great consequence. One of our truckers from Detroit had loaded up his truck and then slept for a couple of hours getting ready to go back to Detroit. And he got to the Wadsworth Main Street crossing of the railroad, and the truck broke into 2 pieces. Scattered brick all over the railroad track, and panic broke out. We had to call the railroad and run down the tracks with flares to call. At that point, there was passenger service, and that passenger train would come wheeling through there, and so we had to forestall the imminent collision problem. We shipped a lot by rail. Railroad car, we'd put 23,000 to 35,000 brick in a small car, and 30,000 to 35,000 in a big car. One of the real treasures of the railroad industry was that it had a 60-foot car designed for brick loading. It was perfect. It got our product cross-country in good shape to the dealer. Detroit, Akron, Cleveland, Youngstown, Pittsburgh, Toledo, Columbus, Cincinnati, all good brick markets. And we did well in each of those. We had 300 of the best dealers in the country. The Wadsworth plant had a union. We had probably 30 or 40 members out of 60 or 70 employees. At plant 5, then later at plant 4, about the same. Supervisors, early days, H.B. Hogg, Bill Cook, who left the company to go and be a representative for the Fire Brick Company in Pittsburgh. Rudy Masura, John Everhard, who lived here in Wadsworth for a long time. Abe Mass, his brother-in-law. Al Wassler from Philadelphia. Bob Potts, who just died recently. George Skaggs from Canada. Bill Clusty, Bert Bueller, Joe Wanko. In the office was Betty Berkey, Gloria Siga, Margaret Everhart, Donna Houston, Shirley Petter, and Rose Ford. We had 2 plants in Wadsworth, Plant 5 and Plant 4. And Plant 4 ran on coal from 1904 to 1962, then switched to gas. Plant 4, 1954 was gas. This saved a lot of hand-handling trying to get the coal around to each of the plants. Our shale pits are on a site at Wadsworth of about 700 acres. Far clay pits where we had access to were in Baltic and Sugar Creek. We had to truck that material up there to put it in. And it gave us a great deal of latitude in making brick from various colors and tints. The fire clay came out with a tan or a buff color, and mixed that with manganese and shale, and we could make gray brick. And by the way, one of the funny stories along the line, I was called one night by our Manhattan architect dealer and said, "Pat, get on the next plane and get down here. You got to see what's happening down here." I said, "Well, Dick, what's going on?" He said, I'll show you. I'll take you out to the job." So I jumped on a plane. I got down to LaGuardia, and from LaGuardia over to Kennedy, where this big Sephardic temple was. I kept quizzing him about what was going on. He said, "I won't tell you. You can see when I get there." So we arrived at the job site. I got out of the car, and come running at me was the big architect. And he says, please, Mr. Brannigan, no crosses." What had happened? We were shipping a gray range with about 10%, 20% real dark pepper color. And there was an Irish bricklaying crew, and they would go down to the local pub and get their snaps about 9 o'clock in the morning. One day they decided they were going to pep up this job, so they decided to stack 6 bricks in a row and put a couple out like this. And it's a Jewish temple. Oh, they had to tear the walls down. We got an extra couple of carloads of brick out of it. It took about 2 to 3 weeks for us to process brick from pug mill to dock. We had to dry all the material. There was a pound of water in every brick. It had to be extracted. If it didn't come out, it would explode the brick in the kiln, and we had that happen several times. A 1,000 brick weighs about 4,500 pounds. Back in the early days, 1948 to about 60, we handled brick by hand and wheelbarrow, 100 brick at a time. Now, that 100 brick weighed 500 pounds or more. And most of the help was very skilled at getting that wheelbarrow out of the kiln door and into a pile somewhere. It was not an ordinary job. I thrill every time I think about it because they were so skilled at protecting the material and making sure that it got to the right location. It's all piecework. Our sample department developed a nice, easy way to display the brick, 15 brick at a time in a large panel, for which we charge $5. Of course, it's about $25 to make it. Then the contrast of that was a 6 brick strap, and that was free. I mentioned the Brick Institute of America. They were remarkable people. Most of them were architectural graduates, and they talked to contractors, architects, and builders, and developed a great sense of confidence in our material. Brick in itself is a preponderant and an increasing way of building durability, values the ultimate cost. That's one of the tricky phrases that's applied to construction of our type. The ultimate cost indicates that a brick job cost you so much, and maybe a little bit more at the time. But if you compare it to frame or some other material, by the time you get through painting and chipping and fixing up and going back several times over these years, the ultimate cost for that type of home is above the cost original for brick. The old phrase still applies: if you can't afford to build it with brick, you can't afford to build it. The plant had many attractions, including motorcycles. The cliffs presented hill climbing challenges and racing and all kinds of activities that they could race with their motorcycles. The vandals were terrible. Sometimes we'd go in after a weekend and find they had destroyed all the stuff in the cab of our shovel, a big shovel. The sheriff used to keep a car nearby for over a weekend so he could get down there in a hurry if he had to. We were always a target for hunters, and yet our insurance company told us if anything happened, we'd lose our insurance coverage. So we told them they can't trespass, they're danger, and insurance threat. We planted thousands of Christmas trees in the early days, and they're still growing, but it's a Christmas target. People come up from where the redbird was over the hill, cut the tree down, and make off with it. And we never know about them. Our big pond, which many of you may have used for swimming, 4 people drowned in that pond. And it was from swimmers who were drunk. We stocked it with trout, although the fish got wise and didn't respond to an invitation to hook on. The police used to check the tire tracks around our pond because they wanted to, that's the first place they looked for stolen or abandoned cars. We had a Navy diver come in one time to ascertain what's going on in the pond. And he said it's like a used car lot down the bottom of our pond. In 1970, I was sitting in the office and I heard one of our supervisors come in, Pat, you got to help us right away, now. I said, what's going on? He said, well, there's a Lady Godiva that's walking through the plant and she's taking off clothes as she proceeds from the plant. By the time she got through the plant, she was Lady Godiva. And she was going to go over and jump in the lake and commit suicide. I called the sheriff right away, who happened to have a car nearby. He came down and she was poised, ready to go. And stopped her, dissuaded her. General Clay had plants at Ava, Baltic, Lisbon, Logan, Columbus, Nelsonville, Wadsworth with 2 plants, Hartford, Connecticut, Upper Sandusky, and Milan. Now, some of those were minimal and never really contributed much, but we had 5 active plants at one time. And we employed over 500 men and about 50 people in sales office and administration. We also had to take care of architectural needs with full layup panels, which consisted of actual brick, 150 to 500 brick, laid up, which became an asset for the job site. Usually that was an architectural thing with many thousands of brick. Harold B. Epler was born in 1906, Marietta, Ohio. He's an Ohio State graduate. He worked for Huntington Bank for a while until he had a chance on learning that the Landrum family, who owned the Baltic plant, wanted to sell it during the war in 1942. So Epler borrowed heavily and was able to acquire the plant. He was lucky to have Oscar Weidenbach there as a superintendent. And Oscar was so innovative about types of brick that he invented this bark texture, which is still popular, and patented it, and gave Sugar Creek, which had great natural material, a chance to make 15 million brick a year of bark texture, and shipped most of them to New Jersey. In 1954, Wadsworth built Plant 4, brand new tunnel kill plant. And it was the treasure of all the action we had. It eliminated a lot of handling and gas fired. We tore down the downdraft kills, which were all periodic kills, and built new, and Governor Rhodes came in and dedicated it. Harold B. Epler was married to Frances Epler during World War II. They had 2 sons, Don and Hal. Hal died about 5 years ago at 68. He was apparently the heir apparent to the operations. Don Epler is still living, and he's in Florida. He's a realtor, developer, marine builder, has locations in Columbus, Fort Myers, Naples, Cedar Point, Ohio. I enjoyed a full measure of suave and savvy to provide his business, and this is Don Epler, to provide business acumen for the necessary wisdom to be independently successful. I'd like to think of what I was involved here tonight as an odyssey and a legacy. My odyssey is that I've traveled for 40 years in the great encumbrance, great environs of the Wadsworth Brick and Tile General Clay Products Corporation, which provided me with many opportunities to be successful. The legacy is that the good products we developed and produced and marketed are still evident around town. I like to think of the Methodist Church, the churches on High Street, the Lutheran Church, Sacred Heart, all with Wadsworth brick employed and well done. They provide a great chance to reflect and enjoy all the good work that went into it. A little bit about our family. Joan, who's here tonight, spent 40 years or 50 years as a journalist for the Wadsworth News Banner. We were married in 1948, after 69 years now. Children, Patrick Jr., age 20, a senior at Wabash College, school paper editor, radio program, enormous student and a great kid, was killed in a railroad accident when a truck hit the lead engine on 11, took 11 cars and 3 engines over on top of him. James, who lives in Carlsbad, California, is retired from Science Application Incorporated. He was vice president. His wife is vice president of hospital administration. Dr. Thomas J. Brannigan, interventional radiologist in San Diego, is one of the top doctors in the area. He lives in Scripps Ranch. Peggy Brannigan Smith, married to astronaut Stephen L. Smith. She's currently a vice president of LinkedIn Corporation, computer activity. She has an MBA degree from Stanford. Bonnie Sellers, our daughter, is a vice president of Callback Animal Food Company at Upper Sandusky. They use 200 trucks a day to supply feed for animals, dogs, cats, cows, whatever. The nation have the country. It's a $500 million sales company. She has an MBA from Ohio State. Carol Grand, who was here tonight, right back there, is a KSU honor grad. She's a teacher at Hinckley Granger. Her husband John owns a jewelry store in Worcester. Also a fire engine pizza parlor. Each son or daughter of ours has 1 or 2 dogs each. Grandparents came from Ireland about 1905. Worked for the Vanderbilts in Providence, Rhode Island. Children, Rose, John, Betty, Patrick. My dad died at age 43 in 1934. My mother lived to be 93 in 1978. RJ's brother was president of a college in Ireland. I guess I was going to close with my little phrase about, well, we've been here 69 years. We've enjoyed every day of it. But the real old-timers of Wadsworth still consider us newcomers. Thank you so much. Enjoyed it.
You want to take any questions?
Oh, sure, sure.
Questions? Yes.
Could you tell us anything about the brick on Island Avenue? It starts right here at Broad Street.
As far as I know, about 1905, the Wadsworth Brick and Tile Company made paving brick. And I think that's about when that street went in.
And I
Was
understand,
paved.
apparently there was a lot more streets that had brick from.
Oh, yes.
from Wadsworth.
They've covered them over with tar.
And that's being preserved specifically as a monument to the brick company?
Did who, please?
I said, the street is being preserved and it hasn't been paved over as a commemoration of the Wadsworth Brick Company. That was my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been. Do you know anything on that, Claire Jo?
I don't know.
It lives on there. I think it was the people in the neighborhood raised a fuss.
I think so.
And Fran?
Anytime they want to come out and do it, the people in the neighborhood would get together and say, please, no thank you, we just repair it.
It does have a few patches, I guess, but
It does.
essentially it's intact.
Correct.
So the neighbors would lay down in the road and stop cement trucks. Other questions?
Don, do you have anything to add?
What is that bark brick you're referring to?
Bark brick.
What?
What is bark brick?
Buck brick?
Bark.
Oh, bark. Oh, bark is a texture. It looks like bark of a tree.
Oh, okay.
Very, very prominently used. It's very good quality. The clay at Baltic was especially adaptable to the machining that had to perfect this on the face of a brick and make it adhere.
So if you have a brick house in Wadsworth, how do you know if it's Wadsworth brick? Is there something you can look at to
Yes.
know?
Yeah, I can tell. I can
That's what he
smell
does
it.
on the side.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we competed well here with Home Book Supply and DHL, and we had good contractor relationships, like with Don Leatherman, who appreciated our nearby availability. Plus, we had the eminence that we perfected over the years that carried us a long way, I think.
So Central School was made out of Wadsworth brick?
Which?
Central.
Oh, yes. 1926, I think.
Is your house made out of Wadsworth?
Happen to have a picture of that somewhere. Yes, you bet. Yeah.
Caesar?
Pat, I heard that Fort Knox has Wadsworth brick. Is that true?
I think so. I've heard that. But I haven't any validity to verify it.
But if somebody would take you down there on a tour, you'd be able to identify it.
Oh, I could tell if I saw it. Yeah. Yeah. Dan Sandals was a summer employee of ours back 100 years ago. Now he's the vice president of Westfield Insurance Company. Got good training, didn't you?
Other questions? Yes.
Don't have a question, but my name's Mike Anderson, and I've been in the brick business as long as I've been alive, just about. My grandfather was Shag Coppice, was in Seville. I now have a yard in Mansfield, Ohio. But the people in Wadsworth, I don't think ever realized how good of a company they had back when. When I went to college, I worked for 3 years for Bob Potts in Plant 4. And there was a constant stream of trucks going down what we used to call the lane. And they would, like Pat said, they would go everywhere. They'd go to Toledo, Detroit, you name it. But it was impressive in its day. And I just wanted to add that to it. It was quite a company.
Thank you, Mike. His father was one of the officers of the Coppice Clay Project Corporation with Norm Corbett and
Pat Corbett's here, Norm's wife.
and Kenny Fortenwall,
Yeah.
all who were passed away.
No, I haven't passed.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Kenny, Norm, and George. Yep. I still think they're working for us, though.
Question?
What year, again, did you close your doors, or what was the causes for the company closing down?
It's rather vague because it went through 4 foreclosures. And the impediment was that, and I attended all the foreclosure meetings, that if they recovered a lot of money, who were they to pay it to, whether the county for taxes or National City Bank, which wanted $10 million to cover our debts with them. And so it is Phil Stone here?
No.
Phil bought the land recently, which is good because he now has a tentative occupant with St. Edward's Home on part of the property. And he indicates he also has another potential for a big warehouse for plastics company who needs railroad siding. I'm really disappointed to see how bad the property had been let go. It's been my treasure of my legacy. And I don't know just where all this is going to wind up, but the property is under good hands right now. Now, the Baltic plant was torn down. The Logan plant was sold to the city for highway and also Nelsonville. And the Goshen plant was torn down. So there's nothing left of General Clay. You might ask, how did this happen? Mr. Epler Sr. was a perfect gentleman, a great leader, visionary, accommodating. I can't say enough good things about the 40 years I spent, 30 of them with him. After that period, the management thought there was an endless bundle of money left, and they proceeded to spend it. One of the mismanagement jobs was a big job we took in St. Petersburg, Florida, for $1,400,000 brick, and attempted to make it in two halves. In other words, 700,000 and later 700,000. Everything went fine with the first 700,000. They got this bank building up pretty big. Came time for the second, it didn't match. So we had 700,000 bricks sitting in the plant with no reference. Had to make it again, which makes $2,000,001. Those things don't lend very good for profit.
Was the flare plant, was that Wadsworth brick? Because I can remember the whole smokestack back there. They finally took it down because I think they thought the airplanes were going to hit coming into Wadsworth.
Yeah. Although, in that same regard, pilots who had planes down at Wadsworth Airport used to look at our kills and consider it almost a landmark for them as a reference point.
Yeah.
Because we always had glowing kills.
Yeah. That was something else.
Now, I recently looked at an old picture, and probably one of those over there. So the Rivers family lived on location?
Yep.
I didn't realize that till Jim told me, and he pointed out his house that was pretty much next to the kiln.
Well, we did pretty well. When the plant was changed in 1950, in 1952 we began a 19-week strike. And again in 1972, the same thing. We shut down for 19 weeks. In October, started up and ran 3 weeks, shut it down again. So we didn't have a good history with the union, but the argument was over right to work. And our owner was thoroughly convinced that you should have a choice whether you want to join a union or not. And he fought a vicious battle with the then American Federation of Labor over that issue. And finally, both sides gave up and said, we got to discontinue this. I brought an array of pictures over here, some production jobs we did, like hiring a speech center in Cleveland. I did take liberty to put up our son-in-law, Stephen L. Smith, astronaut, down at the end there. And the picture below was one he took at 500 miles in space of Houston. Anything else?
Over here, what do you have, Pat? Or what do you have set out on the table?
Oh, I've got an array of different kinds of brick that were made. Brick's very adaptable. Planter, memorable. 1776 to 1976. And a piece from the Vatican. And we didn't make this, but it shows you the flexibility that you have with clay. This is made by Glengarry Brick Company in Reading, Pennsylvania. Good friends of ours. I have an array of just plaques and certificates and pictures over there if you'd like to look at them. Mostly concerned with me. Okay. I've enjoyed all of this, and I thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to see you again. And until 2013, when we do this again, 2017, stay healthy.
Thanks a lot.